Wow. Let me, as we close up, let me ask you one other thing. You brought it up there. I was going to bring up crypto. You mentioned that, but I want to bring up AI because I've listened to
Mhm.
you talk about this over the years. And so I saw a study recently. Upwards about 70% of people are concerned AI is coming for their job. What's your take on that? Are these concerns well founded, or how should we think about
I
this so-called
I'm
AI
just look,
revolution?
maybe yeah, maybe it's because 'cause I'm just old, right? Just saying old fart doesn't get tech, right? I'll literally wear the T-shirt, right? I use LLMs. I've published an academic paper using LLMs. I know what these things are. They're pretty damn useful. They'd be pretty good. In higher education, they're a disaster because they're basically a plagiarism generator, but park that for a minute, right? Are these transformative technologies? Maybe. I mean, electricity was a transformative technology. It took us 30 years to wire every building. Um, are you going to be able to fire everybody and replace them with AIs? Well, if so, who's going to buy shit? Because AIs don't consume things. So that would seem pretty weird. More importantly, 15 years ago, we called this thing big data and machine learning. And what machine learning did was to look at unstructured data and find patterns. Then there was this whole research that was kind of parallel or adjacent to this on neural nets. And that became the basis of large language models, which are basically algorithms that predict the next thing that comes along. So, if this, what's the probability of this? What's the conjoint probability of that given this under the conditions, right? And you just map it out, right? So, one of them takes unstructured data, finds a pattern, and the other one basically says, given the pattern, what can I generate? And if you stick a neural net on the end of that, you get talking Google, right? That's it, whole thing, right? That's all it is, right? Now, if that's the case, is this going to change the world? Well, back in 2020, there was a book called The Race Against the Machine by a couple of guys at Harvard. And they said that, if I remember right now, 60% of all jobs would be automated by 2020. Ooh. And then Oxford Man Institute, I think it was. No, it wasn't Oxford Man. It was somebody else, Oxford, 2016, came along and said, nah, 40%. And then for 2020. And then in 2016, the OECD came along and 20%. And we got to 2020, and the answer was zip. Right. So this is called a hype bubble. Now, sometimes these things can actually be kind of beneficial in the long run. I'll give you a good example. It's back in 1999 when people were buying Kramer.com. When the whole thing went caboodle, what was left was loads of fiber optic cable that people had laid down without the processing power to actually use it efficiently. 10 years later, next Netflix showed up with the servers. So if you have a technological bust, yes, there's a lot of like damage done short term. These firms go under, etc. But if they leave real things behind, that's great, right? There was no bust in machine learning. It just kind of got seamlessly integrated into things, and it is part of what we're doing now. But it got hyped beyond belief, right? It was this the whole era of like, if you don't send your child to coding camp,
Yeah.
they'll die poor and homeless, right? And it's like number one job that's actually being replaced by AI is coding, right? It's
Yeah.
the only thing that's going, right? That was foreseeable. So anyway, we've now decided to call this something else, and people are seduced by it because it's a talking Google. And if you do Claude, it's so obsequious. It's basically like a digital butler. But if you step back from it a minute and say, is this a transformative technology? Maybe. Is it going to replace everybody? No. Here's how it's going to damage people. If you're in college now and you are under a lot of pressure because you think that unless you take 5 classes and have 3 majors and major in things that are dead impressive, even though you're not into it, you'll die poor, alone, and homeless, then you will be under acute time pressures. And what you will do is you will use these technologies to cheat. I've seen it already, right? And when that happens, you normalize cheating, and then it becomes easy, and then you get good at it, and your other friend's good at it. And then we end up in a situation whereby you've passed a class in international monetary relations, and that's fabulous. You've got an A on your transcript. And you go for an interview and you meet the private sector equivalent of me, and that guy turns around and goes, so tell me about the Latin American financial crisis and what lessons did it have for the East Asian crisis, part of your interview? You don't remember anything because you just made that shit up by pulling it out of an LLM, and you fail. And I've got this sneaking suspicion that the rise that we see now in graduates not getting jobs isn't the direct effects of that. It's the indirect effects of the people who are showing up not being very good. That's what I worry about with the skill effects of AI. If you're a scientist or a researcher, this is awesome. If you use this to cheat sheet your way through college, you're dumbifying yourself and it's going to harm you in the long run.